Good morning, everyone. This is John with Gun.Deals, and today we're going to be taking a look at a very inexpensive handgun that might be a little bit older, but it also might be one of the best inexpensive handguns to pick up if you're on a super tight budget, and that is the Taurus G2c. But before we get into the video, while you're here, go ahead and like, share, and subscribe, as that is all free and it does help us out quite a bit. On top of that, go ahead and comment your favorite cheap handgun in the comments down below. Now, how cheap is the Taurus G2c? Well, depending on where you're looking online, and I do happen to know of a few places where you might be able to find a good deal on one, you can often find them for under $250 and sometimes right around the $200 mark, which for a semi-auto, fully featured handgun, even though this one here is a little bit older, is a very, very good deal. Now, Taurus is well known for inexpensive firearms of all sorts of different types, revolvers, polymer framed handguns. They do a little bit of everything in the handgun space. These are made down in South America, in Brazil, I believe, and then imported through Georgia. So they are a non-American made firearm, but they also have that price tag to match for those of you on a super tight budget. Now, getting into the basic specs on the Taurus G2c, this is, of course, a polymer-framed striker-fired handgun, very standard for the industry. This one here has the black slide with a matte black finish. It is a stainless steel slide. The finish on it is very cheap. We'll get into that a little bit later on. The barrel is a 3¼ inch stainless steel barrel. No issues there. Talking about the frame, these come in either a 10+1 or a 12+1 configuration. The one that I purchased, which I actually got locally for, again, about $250. The one that I got came with two 12-round magazines. The magazines themselves are metal, which is quite nice. These ones have the yellow follower. As far as the magazines go, initially, the quality seems to be very high. The downside of having, this style of magazine is that they're a little bit more expensive than like aftermarket Glock mags or some of the other magazines on the market, but they do seem to be of at least decent quality so far. I haven't had any issues with them whatsoever. Now, they both came with a little pinky extension, which for my hands works very well, and I don't have particularly large hands. If you have really big hands, then this might be a little small for you. Now, in terms of size, it is kind of a compact size. It's a little bit smaller than something like a Glock 19, but it's going to be a little bit bigger than something like a Shield Plus. In just about every dimension, it's going to be a little taller, maybe not about the same length because they're using the same barrel, but a little bit thicker and just a little bit more bulbous. Basically, in every direction, it's going to be a little bit bigger. Now, in terms of weight, unloaded, it comes in at 22 ounces, which is maybe a couple ounces heavier than some of the other guns on the market for a 12+1 polymer frame striker-fired handgun. But again, it's in the ballpark and certainly not enormous. Now, we're going to go ahead and start with the grip and work our way up. Now, on the magazine well, there really isn't much of one to speak of. Now, there's nothing that you can catch on or get hung up on, which is quite nice. Some other handguns have a very bad magazine well in that regard. There is maybe the tiniest bit of beveling there to help you get the magazine in. Fortunately, the magazines are pretty aggressively tapered, so they are fairly easy to get in place. But again, it's not going to have any sort of like enhanced magwell. As far as that goes, it's just decent. Now, the rest of the grip, the angle itself is perfectly fine. It's a more neutral grip angle than something like a Glock, which I think a lot of people are going to find more comfortable. The texturing on it is very patchy, but it has very aggressive texturing on the front and the back where you really need it the most. However, about 70% of the places where your hands are going to be, there isn't going to be any texture whatsoever, so you just have this very slick plastic with, again, basically no texture whatsoever. You do have a couple divots here in the middle of the grip for no reason. They're not going to help you in any way, shape, or form. Now, you almost have a little bit of a gas pedal divot on both sides of the frame for your left-hand thumb or your right-hand thumb, depending on how you're shooting, of course. And it will help you to get a little bit more purchase on the frame. So if you have a very aggressive thumbs forward grip, it is going to help you control recoil a little bit more. We'll talk about recoil control more in a minute, but it is actually pretty good for a gun of this size. So the grip texture that they have is very good. It's very aggressive, very sandpaper-like. I personally like that quite a bit. Again, I just wish they had more of it. Again, this is a little bit of an older handgun, so I can't fault it all that much. But again, if we had the choice of more versus less, I would also always choose more texture versus less. Now, in the back of the frame, you actually have a pretty tall beaver tail, so the actual slide itself is pretty far away from your hand. So no matter how high you're riding the back of the frame, that slide is really never going to touch you whatsoever. Now, on the back of the beaver tail, it is rounded, but there's almost a little bit of a sharp edge right there, which again, when you have that very high grip on the back, every time you pull the trigger, it's a little bit uncomfortable. It's a little bit of that sharp edge on your thumb bone, which is, again, just a little bit uncomfortable. Definitely not the worst thing in the world, but again, just worth noting. Now, the trigger guard itself does have a little bit of an undercut, which means that you can, again, get your hand a little bit higher, which for those of you with bigger hands is going to help because the frame is pretty short at only 12+1. And so, again, if you have bigger hands, anything that they can do to help you get more of your hand on the gun is, of course, a good thing. Now, the front of the trigger guard is squared off. I don't believe there's any texture on it. No, there's no texture on it whatsoever. Again, most people don't wrap their thumb around the front or their finger around the front of the trigger guard. And of course, in this case, I have a TLR7 sub, so you can't do that anyways. Speaking of the TLR7 sub, you do have an accessory rail, which is a fairly standard Picatinny accessory rail on the Taurus G2c, and my TLR7 sub with the 1913A adapter on there fits just fine, and it has a pretty solid lockup. Didn't have any issues when I was shooting it. A couple hundred rounds held up just fine. Now, before we talk about the trigger, which is definitely one of the most interesting parts on the G2c, we are going to go ahead and go over the controls. Now, starting with the magazine release, which I don't believe is reversible for you wrong-handed shooters out there, but it is very small, very low profile. It is a bit of a reach for somebody like me who, again, has a little bit smaller hands, but it does work just fine. Again, for that EDC application, small, out of the way, very good. You're not going to be accidentally hitting it. And again, the magazines do drop very free. They're very positive ejection on the magazines, all good there. As far as a basic magazine release, I don't have any issues with that. Now, this model does have the frame mounted safety, so of course up is on and down is off. Now, me personally, I've never felt the need for a safety, a manual safety on a striker fired handgun. Usually they have internal safeties that take care of all of that for you. However, on this specific handgun, for the maybe more newbie clientele that it's catering to with that very low price tag, entry level, maybe somebody's first handgun, their first kind of do everything handgun, maybe it makes more sense for that application before somebody gets more comfortable. Now, as far as the safety itself goes, I did use it the entire time that I was shooting. So basically you would just have it ready to go, and then it's a very simple flick down, and then you just ride the safety, just press down on it, almost like a little bit of a ledge or something to hold on to. As far as that goes, it was very intuitive. All you do is just have your normal grip and press down, and it's going to come off. Now, it is also a slide lock, so if you have the safety up, you cannot move the slide. Of course, if you have it down, then the slide is free. And of course, if the slide is locked to the rear, you can't engage the safety because the slide is in the way. Now, moving forward from there to the slide release, this is where the two items in conjunction have a bit of an issue. The slide release itself, or the slide stop, whatever you guys want to call it, it is fenced in a little bit. It's fairly low profile, again, perfectly fine for an EDC style gun. The issue with it is when you're going to insert a new magazine, so you go ahead, you insert your new magazine, you almost have to reach around the safety to get it to go down. Now, it is very stiff with an unloaded magazine. Without a magazine in, it will go down just fine. Again, this is fairly new at this point. I've only put a few hundred rounds through it at this point. The magazine release, or not the magazine release, the slide release is very small, and it kind of gets in the way of the safety. Probably not a big deal, but that is really my only ergonomic complaint with the gun, is that to get the slide release to go, to get that slide home, you do need to kind of reach around the safety to get to the slide release. Or of course, you can just slingshot the slide, whatever works best for you. But again, just something to note. You do also have a Glock style takedown, which is incredibly easy. Pull the slide back a little bit, pull down on both sides of the slide release lever, and there you go. Now, getting into the trigger on the G2c, which as I mentioned earlier is one of the most interesting facets of this handgun. In the normal operation, when it's loaded and ready to go, you have a lot of take up, but it's extremely light. So you have like a ½ inch, 3/4 of an inch of take up before you hit the wall. It's extremely light though, maybe a pound or so. Now, once you're on that wall, you're gonna start building pressure. There's a little bit of a rolling break, a little bit of grit. It has loosened up a little bit. I've probably dry fired this about 1,000 times at this point. And now it's ready to go for the reset. Now, the overall pull weight is probably about 6 pounds, which is not bad whatsoever. Again, you do have a lot of take up, but the wall itself is pretty decent with a light rolling break. Again, a little bit of grit, basically like a stock Glock trigger, though it does feel different just because you have all of that take up and the trigger itself is a little bit different. The reset is pretty short, not the shortest reset, but you're right back on that wall. And again, 6, maybe 7 pounds of a rolling break. Honestly, not that bad for a very inexpensive handgun. For a cheap handgun, this is one of the better triggers on the market, especially in that low $200 price range. Now the trigger on the G2c does have another trick on its sleeve. So again, in normal operation, pull to the wall, 6-7 pounds, rolling brake, release all the way out, you get a full reset, and you can actually manually re-engage the striker and pull all the way through. Now on that restrike, its restrike capability, the trigger is much longer and it's much heavier because, of course, instead of being pre-crocked like this is and it's ready to go, you need to manually pull through the entire trigger. So again, here, I'm not resetting the striker. I'm going to do it manually with my trigger finger. Starts from the top, very, very heavy, gritty. Then you hit that same wall, but instead of being 6 or 7 pounds, it's probably somewhere between 10 and 12 pounds. And then you keep pulling through. Again, very, very heavy, but what that means is that if you get a click no bang or a light primer strike or any sort of issue, instead of having to tap the magazine, rack, do whatever you need to do, you can simply just keep pulling the trigger until it goes off. Usually if it doesn't go off the first time, hopefully it goes off the second time. And I have had that happen in other guns with cheaper ammunition. Now, I should note that all the ammo that I put through this was 115 grain ball, some 124 grain cellar and pellet, but most of it was Callaway Ballistics remanufactured ammo. Now, getting into reliability, so far, it has been 100% reliable through about 250 rounds of mostly remanufactured ammunition, which in my books is pretty good. Now, that is absolutely not to say that this is the most reliable, durable handgun on the market. In fact, I would say far from it. When you get into handguns this cheap, especially from brands like Taurus, you are going to run into issues. I know they released, I think, their new G4X or whatever it was, and they had a big recall on it. So you are going to be running into issues when you get into cheaper handguns. It is absolutely not going to be as durable as much more expensive handguns. But again, if you're looking at buying a $500 to $800 Glock, you're probably not the same person looking to buy a $200 Taurus at that very entry level. So far, it has worked very well. Though again, that is very anecdotal to this specific handgun. Anytime you're in really cheap guns, you're going to get less quality control, so your gun may perform better or worse than mine. And again, parts breakages over 1,000 to 5,000 rounds are probably going to be much higher than much more expensive guns in that same round count. Now again, for an entry-level gun so far, I can totally recommend it based off of the reliability and durability that I've seen of it, but it's going to take much more ammunition to give it a long-term pass. Now, getting into the rest of the gun, it's going to be just the slide and the barrel. The slide is stainless steel. On the front, you do have some scallops, which if you do like to do your front press checks for whatever reason, you totally can do that. On the back, you have some very aggressive serrations, which again, work well if you need to grab the slide or manipulate in any way. The iron sights that it comes with are steel sights, which is nice. The rear is adjustable for windage and elevation, which is cool. That's not necessarily a feature you're going to be getting on a lot of other guns. Mine were a tad bit high from the factory, probably about 6 inches at 40 yards, which is a pretty easy adjustment. Now, as far as the sights themselves go, it is a square notch in the rear. They are 3-dot sights, so you have 1 dot in the front, 2 in the back. They're just white dot sights. It's a pretty antiquated aiming system as far as iron sights go. Totally workable, totally functional. I mean, if you're good with iron sights, you're going to be good with these. They're not the most precise, fast target sights on the market, and of course it's not cut for an optic either. Not really a big deal for somebody like me, especially in this price category for an EDC gun. I was able to take it out to 100 yards on a 10x16 steel, so for me that's a win with a pretty short barrel. Now again, the barrel is a stainless steel barrel, just a basic finished stainless steel barrel, 1 in 10 twist, 9mm, of course. No issues with it. As far as accuracy, I was able to get like a 2-inch group at 15 yards with remanufactured ammo from a rest, so that's good enough as far as I'm concerned. It's not going to be winning any awards for accuracy, but again, it was accurate enough and reliable enough. As far as features on the slide go, it does have a loaded chamber indicator, so if you have a round in the chamber, that will pop up, expose a little bit of red, and let you know that there is a round in the chamber. So as of right now, the G2c is pretty accurate, pretty reliable, the ergonomics are pretty good, and it's very cheap, which means that it is a winning combination in terms of value. And I think that is where it shines. Is it going to be as good as any more expensive handgun on the market? No, probably not. Is it going to have the same features? No. Is it going to have the same durability, long-term, whatever reliability, so on and so forth? Probably not, especially not when compared with some of the bigger, more well-known brands, Smith & Wesson, Glock, so on and so forth. But for that $200 price tag that it has, can it be beat? Well, as of right now, I don't know of a better handgun for cheaper. Now, I will note at the end of this video that I absolutely hate high points. I know some people on the internet really like them, but the capacity sucks, the size sucks, the trigger sucks, the sights suck. I hate high points. They've never been reliable for me. They've never been particularly durable either. I know it's like a meme online that they're like reliable and durable, but every time that I've shot one, I've had issues with them. I think they kind of just suck. I would much rather have something like the G2c, which has a pretty decent trigger, pretty decent feature set for only a little bit more money than a high point. So at the end of the day, so far for the money, I really like the G2c, and I'm actually looking forward to trying out the G3c and the G4X and some of the other handguns in Taurus's lineup. So with all that out of the way, guys, let me know what you guys think of the G2c in the comments down below and what I should compare it against in the future. And with all that out of the way, guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I will see you in the next one. Peace off.